there? If not, just yell louder and interpret.
Well, I want to yell louder.
Yeah, yell louder.
So I'm Dwyer, and I want to tell two stories. One is like an origin story. Lack of better word. And another story is a whole bunch of stories kind of rolled together in one. It's not going to take too long. It's not going to take too long. So,
Yell. You said you're going to yell.
yeah, I'm trying. Mike. So, should I do that?
Yes.
All right.
It doesn't reach over here much more, so just gonna hang on.
I'll stand over here.
I'll get up and speak. I don't know if I can do a story, but I'll try.
Look it up.
Anyway, there we go. So first, the origin story, which I wasn't around for, but it was reported to me by Reed's dad, Ben. And it was a bunch of years ago. We were standing in the duck blind at Round Lake, and he told me this story. And so I'm going to tell you that. And it's kind of like the, how Reed came into my family life. Like Reed and I, my dad and Reed's dad were really good friends. And nobody would ever accuse these two men of being really funny. They weren't life of the party kind of guys. But they did share this kind of thing. They had a dry sense of humor. And when they got together, my father and Ben, a big part of their conversation and the way they liked to talk to each other was kind of like a witty banter, where they would tease each other and make fun of one another and like that. So that's a little bit of background. So Ben told me this story, and the way it went was that in the spring of 1955, Ben contacted my dad and said, I want to come over and introduce you to my newborn son, Reed. And so my dad said, come on over. And so Ben did, probably put the boy on the passenger side of the front seat, drove over, and then scooped him up and came up to the front yard. My dad met him at the door, and Ben held him up and said, what do you think about this? And my dad said, without a pause, about what? So you have to think about that. Anyway, so I wasn't born yet. I came like 4 months later, and probably a few years after that, we became aware of each other because we weren't at that time. And so for 60 plus years, we knew each other. And there's lots of memories, of course, but I want to talk about like a bunch of them that are associated with that place that Susan and Reed bought in Wisconsin, near Spooner, Wisconsin, a cabin, was it early 90s? Does that sound right? And so he and I had a lot of times there, and probably a lot of you have a lot of times there too. And I want to tell you a couple stories about the cabin, because they're kind of fun. Anyway, first time I was there, Reed did, I don't know how we did this, but I was traveling with an old college friend from Duluth to St. Paul, and Reed had told us, you should come down. I'll be at this cabin, and stop by, and we'll get together. So we did, and we found Reed upstairs putting insulation in between the rafters in the ceiling. And Susan commonly would say Reed was not very handy, but he kind of was. He kind of wanted to be handy.
Not as handy as you, that's what I would say.
Yeah,
So pissed.
but of course his motivation to be handy was mostly because he didn't want to pay anybody else to do it. But anyway, that first weekend I was introduced to kind of a ritual that would play out over the next 2+ decades of visits to the cabin. And they involved, like, we'd get there, we would do some chores or some repairs and some stuff like that. And then we would have happy hour on the deck, usually involving martinis, but not always. And then we would adjourn to some brown food restaurant, which was nearby, and there were a bunch of them. And then there was lots of what I would call what's said at the cabin stays at the cabin kind of conversation. And that was kind of the routine. And so I don't know whether it was 91 or 92, I don't know when it was. But and then in the years that would follow, oftentimes midweek I'd get a call from Reed. And probably some of you have had this. And he'd say, "John David, why don't we sneak up to the cabin this weekend?" And it was always, "John David," and we were always going to sneak. It was kind of like we were either trying to get away or get away with something. So maybe we were. Probably many of you know that Reed was an Eagle Scout, as was his father, as was his son, Ben. And I think scouting and the principles of scouting left a really lasting impression on Reed's character as an adult. He internalized a lot of these things. And one of those principles was loyalty. And Reed was a famously loyal friend. Famously loyal. And I think he used these weekends at the cabin, these overnights at the cabin, and lots of you probably got them. Did anybody get these calls and say, "Come up to the cabin for the weekend"?
Too many.
Well, and of course, there were all the times up there with the families and stuff, but I'm kind of thinking about like the one-on-one parts. But I think he used the cabin as a way to like build new friendships, and more importantly, maintain his existing friendships. And unlike anybody I've ever known, he worked his friendships really hard, and he was dedicated to them. And so, for me, in addition to like the good times and up there and stuff like that, he quizzed me on my what I would describe as my somewhat uneven personal life. As many of you know, I've had some issues in the marriage department.
Expand on that?
Issues in the marriage department. And so he would ask these direct questions, and they'd make me like kind of uncomfortable. But I can say that he really did help me. You know, she's a licensed psychologist.
Oh, yeah.
But, you know, he practiced at the cabin. And so he helped me understand, work through some things and understand some things that I probably would have just buried or just wished away. And so I've been always really grateful for that. So let me finish up with the cabin with one particular visit we had. It was in August of 1994. And so my mother and father, they were on their way back to Arizona, which is where they lived after they retired from Duluth. And they'd been visiting up in Duluth with family and friends. And Reed had this idea that he should invite our fathers, my dad and his dad, and my two brothers, Paul and Brian, and me and we should all get together for a night at the cabin. And so we did. And we went down there, and I think this was the weekend, who can contradict me, but I think this is the weekend when we went out for lunch at Lipsy Pies and Ben Byers Sr. ordered a half pitcher of beer. And they said, you can't do that. And then we had martinis on the porch at happy hour, like we did, and we talked and we reminisced, and it was just wonderful, really great. And so the next morning, my mom drove down from Duluth and met us at Yo Mama's of all places, right? Another brown food place down there. And we had breakfast, and then we all departed for St. Paul, Duluth, and Phoenix. And that was a really special weekend for me because it was the last time any of us saw my father. Because he passed away that October. And I'll always be so grateful to Reed for orchestrating this thing. It was like he knew someone. So, here's to my good friend R.G. Reed Grover. That's what I call him. Dedicated and loyal husband to Susan. Father to Ben. Sibling, Becky and Martha. Father-in-law to Megan, and friend to so many of us. He enjoyed his life. He lived it fully. And he's going to be sorely missed. It is and will be sorely missed by all of us who knew him.
Thank you.